Yes, thank you for taking your time out to watch, to listen to Canute Exploration, your topic in a podcast. I am Dr. Canute White. You know, most of you who know me know that I'm Jamaican. The accent, it cannot hide. And there's a Jamaican artist that sing a song, Prisoner on a Bed of Roses. And the prison system tend to be challenging in Jamaica, and I'm sure in the United States, and where you're sitting as well in your geographical area. And people go into the prison and they're assumed to that they should be rehabilitated, and they would come back out with having challenge. And even if they're rehabilitated, the challenge that they'll be having is social, occupational. They want a job, they want to recommit themselves, so to speak, to society, to be engaged in societal activities again. And a lot of times they're being ostracized, so to speak, because of what they have gone through, but they have served their time, right? And then many of these people who came out of prison, would trust me, would show you that they are suitable to come back into society and to contribute to societal growth. So my guess, he had thought about that, and he started a non-profit, and we're going to talk about that non-profit and talk about his authorship as well and other contribution that he had made to society. He thought about what's going on as it relates to those convicts and try to assist them. I'm going to let my guest into the studio and we'll have a talk. John Graham, how are you doing, sir?
I'm very glad to be here this morning. Thank you.
You're welcome, man. But before we continue to talk about the meat of the matter, so to speak, who is John David Graham? I like the name, John David Graham.
I don't normally use the middle name, but when I wrote my book, my publicist said, we have to fill the cover with something. So we threw that in. And what was happening is people kept confusing me with John Grisham. And I appreciated the compliment, but I didn't want to have him sue me. So
you dropped the David in there.
We put the David in there because it protects me from the legal issues.
I like that. So you're an author, a businessman. Talk to me.
The resume is it's like going through a corn maze. I graduated college with a degree in psychology, but I had no direction.
Okay.
And this was in the late 60s, and there was a lot of political confusion. There were protests. There literally was violence on campuses. We had the Vietnam issue, and so I came out of college prepared to join the Air Force until Kent State. And after Kent State, there's no way that I could be part of what I thought to be this war machine. Yeah. And so I ended up doing what we call alternative service in Detroit with children's home, and which was perfectly legal and acceptable. It's a way of fulfilling your obligation to your country, but you do it in a morally acceptable way. And so that was my first exposure to people who come from a different, not just ethnic, but emotional background.
Wow.
And I was dealing with children who come out of literally of no homes, no parents. And this was after the Detroit riots in '67. So it was I spent the next 30 years looking for where I could find my career, my future. Right. And I worked in the orphanage, and then I was a truck driver, and I was a building contractor. I was a journalist. I was even a minister at one point, thinking that I could make a difference in the community there.
Yeah.
But I found that there's as much politicking in the church as there is in Washington. And we're seeing that more today, of course. But so here I was at 53 years old. I had a family. We had moved many, many times. And it was difficult for my family because I was responsible for them. Right. And I couldn't find my fit. So at 53, my wife and I said, maybe we can help other people who are struggling as much or more than us.
Right.
And I remembered that Detroit experience. So we started a homeless shelter in
Oh.
our own house. And that one thing led to another. And the Department of Correction asked us if we could take in men and women coming from prison.
Wow.
So we put what little money we had together and bought another building, remodeled it, and that became a shelter. And
John, I don't want you to go much into that yet. All right.
Okay, you're the boss.
Coming there. But look, I want you to tell me about your childhood. Who was John? Who was John back then? Age 7. Wow.
Now, see, that's important.
Troublemaker, you know, John. You were a troublemaker. Yeah? You got a lot of spanking, John.
So you want me to talk about where my growing up years?
Yeah, what you're growing up.
Well, you have to understand the 60s, because we grew up thinking that there was going to be a nuclear attack at any time. We had drills in school. It's called duck and cover. Okay. And we were supposed to go under our desk in case the Russians dropped a nuclear bomb. And of course, that would really make us safe. I know that. Mm-hmm. But we grew up with that. And I also grew up with the polio issues. Mm-hmm. We were very aware of that all these things, because we felt threatened all around us. And so there was a great deal of instability. And my family was not what we call communicative. I wasn't abusive, but basically we were left on our own. And so I grew up without direction. So we went into this 60s environment, and then trying to find a work or direction. I had no idea what to do or where to go, because I like to say, I use a phrase in my book that we grew up alone. We lived at the same address. We had the same last name. We even ate at the same table, but we were all strangers.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And this is what I found. This is the pervading stream that runs through everything we deal with. That the family structure, where it may be, if it's abusive, it may be even more subtly so by abandonment.
Right.
And there are people who grow up, I call it running behind everybody else, because they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And you and I could be working very hard, running as fast as we can, but we can't catch up to what we call normal people.
I like that. That is going into your book, and I will talk about that, right? But look, John, the point that you made just now about living in the same home and being strangers, so to speak, right? The cell phone, we see that happening. Even in the workplace, we don't talk much to each other again. We talk to our cell phone, so to speak. And it creates this sort of a distance, a strangerhood, if you may, because of the cell phone. So I understand you.
It's so pervasive in our culture today with the electronic technology. Yeah. There's even there's also a shift in the way we meet together. There's a book called Bowling Alone. And what he was saying was, coming out of the 50s, after the Depression, after the war, our parents had a great deal of hunger to be with community. So they had Kiwanis, they had Rotary, they had church groups. They had all these community events, including bowling. That was a very, very common community event in American towns. But all of that changed after the 60s. Mm-hmm. And television came in, and now the internet, where everything is done alone. So it's just me and this screen.
Alone, yeah.
And so we are raising a whole country of isolated strangers.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's why I think that my work has been so effective, because ultimately, when you're struggling, you can't end up in jail. Yeah. But many of us don't do that. We end up simply isolated.
Right. And you go ahead, John.
Well, I was going to say, that's why I think the book has resonated with so many readers, because they can identify, not necessarily with the jail part, they can identify with the isolation.
Right. I love to read a copy of that. But you know, what inspired you? This Good Samaritan Home. What inspired you to start that? And why that name?
Well, we started off just to offer a shelter,
Yeah.
but that the data. I was talking to a prison chaplain, and in Ohio they tend to be very progressive in dealing
Right.
with prison rehabilitation, and the data was coming back that just going to prison, punishing people like we did in the 80s, where we said
Yeah.
lock them up,
Right.
particularly with drug offenses. And we tripled our prison population. But what happens is when somebody comes home from prison, all you've done is you stopped whatever was happening and it restarts again when they get home because there's been no change in behavior.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is education, a lot of it is mental health issues, and then you factor
Oh,
in drugs. So if we don't deal with those, they will reoccur.
yeah. But
And
mm, go
well,
ahead.
so what we learned was that we have to have stable housing after prison, and in community is the best place for rehabilitation,
Uh,
not in prison, but after prison.
yeah. And it speaks to you know, to divert a little what goes on in the mental health. I'm in psychology as well. You have, you know, dabbled in psychology, and it is being said now that instead of institutionalizing mental health patients, right, you try to get them in the community as quick as possible because that is where they can get the true treatment. But that's another story. Yeah.
Absolutely. And,
Yeah.
think of it like when you were at home and your mother and father said, "Go to your room. You're grounded."
Mhm.
And so you sat there, and that was your punishment. But
Right.
let's suppose you had to sit there for a year and drop out of school. You couldn't go to
Mhm.
school because you were in your room. That
Right.
would do no good at all.
Right. Yeah.
So, and that's what prison can be. Now
Yeah.
I believe in punishment, accountability,
Right.
but I don't believe in eternal punishment.
Mhm. No, I like that. I like that. And that's you know, if it's a matter of, I understand the concept of eternal punishment as you use it, but if it's a matter of that, therefore somebody has failed because rehabilitation shouldn't take so long. If the prison, the aim of the prison is really rehabilitation and not necessarily punishment, that's another story. And I don't know if you want to say something on that because punishment, rehabilitation.
Well, I want to be very clear that I don't believe that what we're doing is simply hug a thug, where we simply
Right.
overlook what you've done, because I'm very cognizant of the victims in this
Right.
case. But in many cases, the victimizers were victims themselves,
Mhm.
and they simply do what all they know to do.
Yeah.
And because they've been taken advantage of as children, and often they take advantage of others.
Right.
So, what we found was that if somebody has a set sentence and then they are released into the community, but if
Mhm.
number one, they can get a job, they get housing and get a
Yeah.
job, then they can pay taxes,
Mhm.
then they can pay child support,
Right. Yeah.
then they can buy goods in the community,
Interesting. Yeah.
because it costs $109 a day to house one person in prison. And you take that times 50,000 inmates in Ohio alone,
Mhm.
you're talking billions of dollars.
Wow. Wow.
But if you take those persons, they do their sentence, then they're released, and the community back in there with their family, they can be with their children. They pay their child support. Uh, they become taxpayers instead of
Yeah.
tax burdens.
Yeah.
And that to me that makes sense to the Republicans as well as the
Right.
Democrats.
Of course, because it does help the state. Yeah. And we're going to look at recidivism as well. But look, I want to know how you do what you do.
The study came out of Xavier University in Ohio that they found that the number one issue when released from prison is safe housing, because you get out of prison and you're simply released with what we call gate money,
Right.
and you're on your own. And number one, where do you live? What do you do if you don't have family?
Mhm.
And if you don't have a place to live, then you'll do whatever it takes to survive.
Yeah.
So what they've developed for us is called independent housing, and it's not a halfway house. It's not a lockdown facility. It's a cross between a shelter and a mentoring house.
Okay.
And they come and they get free temporary housing, and my
Mm.
staff and I will help them and connect them with community services,
Yeah.
so they can get food stamps, they can get job training,
Right.
they can get housing applications in the community.
Yeah.
And they can stay for, well, technically it starts at 90 days, but often they stay upwards of a year
Mhm.
and no charge.
Yeah, cool. And that's interesting that you also connect them with community resources, right?
Absolutely.
But I have a quick question for you on that, because how long these is it that they get these connected and support quickly, or does it take a long time most of the time?
There's what we call a criminogenic factor, and
Right.
it's what is your how much of your background has certain triggers.
Yeah.
For example, where there are juvenile offenses, how many offenses did you commit?
Right.
How many times have you been to prison? The pattern will tell us how easily you can adapt.
Yeah.
Another factor is if you've been locked up for 30 years, can you imagine coming out into a place where you have no family now?
Mhm.
The last you remember was black and white television.
Yeah.
And now people are walking around with these things doing all their work.
Yeah. Right.
And you're lost.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we try to do is just step by step say the first thing you're going to do is we're going to get you connected with Job and Family Services,
Mhm.
because that's where you'll get your food stamps, and that's
Yeah.
where you'll get some sort of direction. And also in dealing with any child support issues, they will
Right.
help you with that.
Right.
So we don't try to do it all. We do the housing element only,
Mhm.
but that way it's the community, not us.
Right.
It's all of us.
Okay. I love that. How many people have you helped over time?
We started off with just our own house because we had no money and no budget.
Oh.
We literally had we were getting donations of $5,000 a year. So obviously you can't live on that.
No.
My wife was working, we survived,
Yeah.
but in time we added a house, and then we now have a contract with the state of Ohio that they pay us a fraction of what they would normally pay for prison.
Right.
So that covers our bills. But we were able to add one house, then two houses, then three houses, because
Right.
the need was so great. We now have 19 houses in the Western Ohio region of Dayton.
Mhm.
And on any given day, we will have upwards of 80 to 90 men and women in these what we call boarding houses.
Yeah.
And over the years, we've housed and helped 2,500 men and women.
Wow, it's interesting, and I love that. Oh, you have decided that speaks to commitment, right? Commitment in helping these persons coming out of prison. But look, I just like to touch on recidivism a bit, and for those persons who don't understand it or listening to Canute Exploration, your topic in the podcast, it's basically reoffending. Prisoners coming out and going back in because they've offended again, right? Tell me, how have you actually helped reduce recidivism?
Recidivism numbers are based on a 3-year cycle, so
Okay.
we don't deal with that on our end. But the data was clear that if you take care of it, like Maslow's needs hierarchy, the first need is housing, and so we take care of the housing. So if somebody can, number one, stay with us for 90 days or for in some cases a year or 2 years,
Okay.
and they get a job or they get their Social Security reinstated, if they can get some source of income and then ultimately get their own apartment, I guarantee you there's a much greater chance that they'll stay out of jail.
Mhm.
And so we don't have our direct numbers,
Okay.
but the numbers we're seeing from Ohio is it's gone from upwards of 50% recidivism down into the 30s. So, and in California, the numbers were at 70% recidivism.
Interesting. In saying that, I'm sure that you have success stories about, Good Samaritan. What's a success story that you have?
Probably the best example we have is a man named Jimmy who he was schizophrenic, so he had obviously mental health issues, and that led to other issues.
Right.
And he was homeless much of his life, in and out. He was a veteran, so he would get a stipend from that. But when he came to us, he was 67 years old. He was found living in his truck. Actually, his truck had run out of gas. It was winter. He was freezing to death, and schizophrenic. So all those factors. But being a veteran, the VA hospital connected him with us.
Right.
And we were able to partner with the hospital to guarantee his medication. And Jimmy stayed with us for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 months. And eventually we put him up in one of our apartments where he could actually have long-term housing. And he was with us 14 years.
Right.
And Jimmy died when he was 81 years old. And here's what he said: "This was the only home I ever had."
Wow.
Now and Jimmy was so difficult that even the mental health office wouldn't let him come in because he was so disruptive.
Yeah.
But with us, as long as he was on his medication, he was probably, I wouldn't call him part of the family, but it was about as close as it got.
Yeah. I understand that. And I mean, that's a real good success story. And it showed that you guys have been effective in doing what you are doing. And I am sure that there are other Jimmy around, right?
Oh, I could give you a more even optimistic example is
Go ahead.
Walter, who came to us after he was 16 years old when he was arrested and put in prison for 9 years. And he came to us when he was 26 years old.
Right.
And he was in a new community, didn't know anybody. And he was a black man in a white community, a rural community, which makes it a lot of pressure on him.
Yeah.
But we were able to connect him with one of our mentors who hired him in a vineyard as a laborer. And eventually he worked his way up to manager. And Walter not only is still there, and I'd say it's been a dozen years. Yeah. He's still working, but he's married, has a child, and he bought a house in our neighborhood.
Yeah, cool.
So he's a clear example of somebody who did it right.
Yeah, and I love that. Let me congratulate one had died, but condolence to his family still. Yeah, but that other person, Walter, right?
Yes.
Congratulations to you, sir. Right. That's it. But did you face any community resistance when you started housing, individuals coming from prison? We understand the stigma that may occur there.
Absolutely. And the fact that we were starting off in a rural community of, say, 13,000 people where we lived. And race always factors into anything in rural white communities, because you watch the news, you assume that everybody in the black community is a criminal.
Right.
But the data is clear that majority of people in prison are white. Okay. But that's not the felt response. And so we thought when we were first asked to take a resident into our house from prison, and I had a reporter call me and ask about that because she had heard. And I thought, this is great. We'll tell a good story about some positive impact we can make in the community.
Right.
And maybe we'll get people to come out and help be mentors. Immediately, it blew back when that story came out. And there were protests, there were petitions, there were calls to the city hall, there were ordinances passed, there were threats. I even it was so intense at one point that I had police protection.
Wow.
And that took years to overcome. In fact, we had to end up suing the city 3 different times.
Yeah.
But today, those same critics that used to wave at us with one finger now wave at us with all their hands.
I know,
because we have, over time, we've shown them that our house is actually better in the community
Yeah.
because we fixed it up
Yeah.
and we fixed up other houses. So we won those people over very slowly.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's critical. Look, what you're doing, it doesn't just help the community, but the nation and in effect the world, right? Because you're helping to not only continue to rehabilitate these people, but you're also helping them so that you talk about recidivism to reduce that. In fact, you have helped to do that, Graham, and therefore you have helped to keep one more person who might have gone back into crime, out of crime. So I really love what you're doing. I really do, and I'm sure that my audience love what you're doing. And yeah.
And I'll be honest with you that when I was a minister, I was trying to help people as best I could, but I have found that we tend to be in the church. We pretend
Right.
to where everything is fine.
Right.
We think of the church like a social club, but it's a hospital. You're supposed to come in and allow your wounds to show so we can heal them.
Oh yeah.
And I couldn't break through that facade, and I was probably not a very good minister.
Yeah.
So now in the street with people who are clearly bleeding, I feel much more comfortable because there's an honesty coming out of prison that says, I know I messed up.
Yeah.
I know I have issues, and I know I need help, and I can work with that.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And that's how you get help. I was a part of the military, and I realized when we have a thing called inspection, which try to neat up everything, even and use the vehicles and so on. We clean them up properly and neat them up and try to fix up certain things. In my mind, some things should be left as is. Don't try to dress up the wound, mildly, because we need help, and therefore we need to expose the challenges, so to speak, so that you can get appropriate help.
And I think, particularly in prison, you become a number. Right. And that sounds like a minor thing, but imagine that your name is removed from you, and it's no different than Auschwitz, where you had a tattoo and you were no longer a wealthy Jewish German businessman. You were just number 72578 in Auschwitz, and whether you lived or died, nobody cared. Well, in prison, it can be that way.
Okay.
And so what I've learning to do is sometimes the best thing that I can do to help somebody is just listen to them.
Of course.
Just listen. Maybe the best question I can ever ask is, tell me about your kids.
Yeah.
Or tell me about growing up. Tell me about your mother.
Yeah.
And you get somebody talking about their personal things. They show a side that's much more vulnerable, and it shows respect, is what it does.
Of course. And I know I again you're in psychology. I am there as well, and I do a bit of counseling and so on. And I understand the importance of that. Sometimes they just want you to listen. They just want to talk about some challenges.
Yeah.
Right. And that helps. Yeah. But you have lived through a lot, right? From the 60s. I'm not sure what year were you born. I don't want to get into that. Many people don't want to say that to give away age. But you have gone through, lived through a lot, right? All the political, social challenges of the 1960s. How did that affect you, and does it still affect you today?
After Kent State, Kent State was where 4 students were killed, and on that day, I was in a protest at Ohio State University, which was nearby, and the guard was surrounding us. They had their guns on us, and we knew students had died. We knew the country was literally coming apart, and fortunately, nobody was killed in my protest.
Right.
But what it did was it totally undermined my trust in our governmental structure, and it took me 30 years to enter a voting booth. Right. So that's where a lot of this career confusion came from.
Right.
But uh, having been married and having children, but
Right.
mostly, I think what changed my life was finding a way to give back to people who were in the same boat as me and who have been in worse situations, and maybe I can help them, and that's actually helped me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I say that I may be helping people, but the truth is they've helped me become what I call civilized.
Right. Right. No. No. And you're right about that. And when you try to help, I have that sort of a philanthropic a thing about me as well. And it's important for us to help. And when we help people, we feel helped, so to speak, because that good feeling that we get, and it's not about us who are helping, but we still get some payback. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I did a 3-year study for my doctoral work
Right.
on the impact of mentoring ex-offenders in the
Right.
community.
Mhm.
And my study showed that the mentors themselves benefited more than the ex-offenders. Mentors grew in their emotional, spiritual, psychological understanding and,
Mhm.
and authenticity. And
Right.
so the community, or you and I, can benefit by helping others.
Yeah.
And that's where the Good Samaritan name came from. This idea of helping outcast persons is actually to our benefit. And
Yeah.
because it used to be the term Samaritan was a negative term,
Yeah.
but we've turned it around by what this negative concept was turned on its head. And now Good Samaritan is the highest compliment you can give somebody.
Oh, cool. I love that. Hey, John, I listen well, and I heard something here. Doctoral studies.
I'm sorry, please.
You talk about in your doctoral studies.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I did. I did my doctoral work in applied theology. In
Okay.
other words, it's not the doctrines I was studying, but it was the application of it. The
Okay.
focus was on discipleship or on mentoring. And what I found in my studies was that the church historically has been at the forefront of all the social uh, changes in the culture.
All right.
Even the word hospitality in hospital, hospice, it all
Mm.
comes from the Bible word for loving the stranger. And the church, I think this is another discussion, but I'm
Yeah.
very disappointed and concerned with the political involvement of the church today.
Again for that. Yeah.
We've tried to become the Roman authority instead of the Good Samaritan.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so I'm much more comfortable as being the church in the street. And that's what my doctoral studies have shown, that this is the church's history
Right.
and practice. And I'm just
Okay.
trying to reclaim it. That's all.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I'm gonna try to have you again for that. I'll try to have him again, audience, for that. But look, um, do you have a doctorate? Are you Dr. Graham?
Yeah, technically, yes. But and but I think for me, what was more important was
Yeah.
it took me 10 years to complete that degree.
Okay.
Because I was 51 when I started. Most people would never start that late, but I was 61 when I finished it.
Yeah.
And the idea was that I completed something. And that was very, very important for me because of all of my own detours.
Right.
And but at the time, I didn't know that we would be doing Good Samaritan Home, but it was actually perfect for it,
Right. Yeah.
because the idea of the taking the church into the street.
Yeah.
And we don't ask somebody, will you come to church with me or anything like that. We don't ask even, are you a Christian? What we ask is, are you hungry? And
Interesting.
that to me is what the church does best.
Yeah.
We find out what your need is, and I try to help you resolve your need.
Yeah. And that's a political way of doing it, because that's what politicians really do. What your needs are, let me approach it like this. And that's cool. But hey, John, we have to talk again about that tonight. That's interesting as it relates to the church and so on. But look, I'd like to look at you as an author. It's critical that you tell us about that book that you have. It's interesting that we learn about it. Run it as fast as you can. What are you saying, John?
Well, if you look at that picture, that was me. Not literally me, but that
Yeah,
was
okay,
me.
fine.
And that's also the people I deal with. You feel
Mhm.
so isolated, alone. And what I hear from so many residents, and what I lived, was that I'm doing the best I can. I just don't know what to do. I'm running as fast as I can, but I can't catch up with people who were born into nicer homes, or
Yeah.
homes where their parents would talk to them or gave them direction. See, I had no direction, so I just
Yeah.
drifted left and right.
Mhm.
And so the idea is that when I went to the city council and talked about recidivism, I
Yeah.
gave all the data we've talked about.
Right. Uh-huh.
Nobody cares about data. So what I decided to do was, how do I tell the story of second chances in a way that people will read it?
Yeah.
And so I came up with this idea of a fiction story about Daniel Robinson, who
Mhm.
is a Forrest Gump-like character.
Yeah.
He's born in the 50s, and he goes through all these struggles of family abuse, and he goes through the Vietnam protest era. He goes through the Detroit riots.
Mhm.
And that's what that walk through history. But in the process, Daniel learns how to find forgiveness for the abuse that happened to him, and he can in turn offer that forgiveness to others.
Mhm.
It's a fiction story that people will read, and hopefully they'll begin to understand that we all need a second chance.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and the reviews, and particularly the awards coming back, it's garnered 26 awards.
Oh.
Uh, and but more important, the readers who have read it said they'll write back and say, I identify with Daniel. I
Yeah.
lived Daniel's journey, and I cried the whole way through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That to me, we're trying to get people talking about second chances, and the
Yeah.
book is doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Second chances. That's a good thing, to talk about. And you are basically exerting this principle of second chances in your nonprofit, and saying, hey, this is another chance for you, you know to brush yourself off and to start again in society after prison, and that second chance is critical. Yeah.
And I will say this, that we like to think that you write a story and you simply call an agent, and he or she says, love your work, you're going to put it on New York Times. The truth is that, like everything in life, when you don't have the connections and you don't have the support,
Mhm.
you will be rejected. And my novel, I wrote 10 years to complete that novel. I rewrote it 24 times until I felt it was as best I could, but it was rejected 200 times by publishers
Ooh.
until I found my last effort was Don Quixote Press. They're billed as an outsider press for outsider people telling outsider stories, which is
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
that's
that's
when it
cool.
took off. That's when it
That's
took off.
cool.
How
Hey.
many of us are outsiders? We feel like we are.
Yeah, and we are storytellers, because I write as well, and we're telling stories, right? We're telling stories. We're empowering people, our readers, and and guess what happened? You and I and
We're locked up.
in fact, we also have a level of what I'd want to call a legacy that will be ongoing. So our work is ongoing, will be ongoing.
Yeah, I like to think of. I compare it to if you were going to ride in a cruise ship,
Yeah.
and they said, now we're going to have a lecture on lifeboat safety,
Mhm.
and nobody would listen to the passengers on the cruise line would never listen to lifeboat safety. But if they showed them a movie called Titanic, and Jack and Rose and their struggle to survive on the Titanic, everybody understands that I better find out where the lifeboats are.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what I try to do with the book. I want everybody to feel Daniel's
Yeah.
story so they'll carry it into their own families.
Yeah. Appeal to the emotion. It's interesting. But John, how can my audience on Canute Exploration, your topic in the podcast, find you. I mean, I have an audience who are listening, not watching. They're actually on Apple Podcast, another audio podcast platform. Talk to us.
It's easy. JohnDavidGraham.com is my website, and that'll link you to the book if you wanted to on Amazon, but it also will link you to Good Samaritan Home, and you can find out more about what we do there. But there's also a contact. If you want to literally write me personally, you can contact me through my website. And in fact, I got a call from somebody in a neighboring county saying, we want to start a reentry coalition like you've got.
Okay, cool.
Can you help us? Now that to me is that's the dream, where you can actually reproduce what you're doing into somebody else, and that's the legacy.
Yeah. I hope somebody will call you from Florida and say, hey, let me start this as well, because we like what you're doing. Hey, John, I like what you have been doing.
I just hope I don't get calls from Minnesota, because it's a little cold up there.
So Florida will be ideal. Hey,
Florida's fine.
Yeah, cool. John, I like what you have been doing. Thanks for coming on and sharing what you're doing and on Canute Exploration.
My pleasure. It my whole goal is to tell the second chance story any way I can, and podcasting is a whole new venue for me.
Yeah.
But I'm having a great time just telling the story.
Thank you, John. Coming. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hey, that was John David Graham. Yeah, he said he took the David out sometime, but I like the name, right? And look, JohnDavidGraham.com. Go there and you'll find other resources, other links that will be beneficial to you. If you are coming out of prison, talk to John, no? See what's going on. See if you'll be able to get connected, to some of his resources. And let's get involved. Let's see what John have, guys. It was a nice conversation with a man who is committed to helping, to giving second chances. And remember his book, right? Run as fast as you can. Go on and check it out. I note that it's important. His book, running as fast as I can. Sorry, running as fast as I can. You see it here on the screen if you're watching on YouTube channel, and also the website. You will see. If you are not, then it is www.johndavidgraham.com. Go there, and there's a lot to see. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Canute Exploration, your topic in the podcast. I am Dr. Canute White. Just chat with John David Graham. Goodbye.